think you just got to be ready for anything and relaxed, because nothing is going to happen quickly. It's all going to happen under a tremendous amount of heat. Welcome to 10 Minute Travels. With me, as always, is Phil Freeman.
And with me, as always, is Shane Patrick. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about flying helicopters in Africa.
Let's get right to it, shall we?
After 2 years in Africa, what was your take-home impression of that continent?
Well, it's, a couple things. It's still wild. You can still pretty much do what you want there.
It's kind of Wild West.
Yep.
And then you're coming from Alaska, and it's pretty wild up here.
Yep, and it's more wild.
That's refreshing.
If I had gotten there as a 26-year-old instead of a 36-year-old,
you'd still be there?
I probably would have stayed a while, yeah. Because there's opportunity there. We have a great cultural advantage just with the different ways we look at things compared to the people that live there. For instance, thinking ahead, planning ahead. A person there will not buy sugar until the sugar is gone. Whereas I would probably notice that my sugar, I only had a couple cups left, and the next time I went to get groceries, I'd get a bag of sugar too, so that I never ran out of sugar. Not groundbreaking, but way different than the way things are done. So with a little bit of, if you wanted to, you could take over. You could be quite successful. It's going to come with a lot of hassle as well. There's Africa's awesome except for the parts of it that are not awesome. Yeah, free healthcare is great. 50% of adults between 15 and 55 years old being HIV positive is not great. Not believing in condoms, depressing, right? So it's hard to, you're right, it is an open-ended question. It's hard to wrap up your takeaway of Africa in one question. But I guess I would say get over there, see it while it is what it is, because every day there are more people and less elephants. Every day there are more people and less lions. Every day there are more people and more fences.
If you were to meet somebody and they were going to travel to Africa, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would say that thing that I always try to keep in mind of better make sure your sense of humor matches your sense of adventure. You should probably get rid of an idea of personal space, because they don't do that there. They all push together, even when there's no need to. If a building can hold 30 people, they'll make it standing room only in one corner. It's weird, but to me it's weird. So there's that. And I think in general, you just want to slow down. It took me a while to get used to that, how slow. Because I was like, okay, yeah, I'll just relax. I'll be chill. I was coming from Hawaii, which is a pretty chill place. So I thought, I'm like, whatever, I'll be fine. But you cannot say, hi, Phil, I need some help. You must start with, good morning. How are you? How did you sleep? Are you well? How is your wife? Your children? Everyone in your family? And there's this whole thing that has to happen before you can finally say, can you give me a hand putting that fire out? And in the beginning, that is really hard for me it was. That was a really hard thing for me to get used to.
Was it a formality brought on what culture?
Well, it's they pride themselves on being polite. It's really, there's little things like, I remember one time going to, I was the back of the house eating. I was eating with all the employees of this camp. I was the only American. I was the only white person. I was the only one who had English as a first language. These are tribal people. And they were very kind. They switched to English when they saw me coming, which was really nice. And all of the women stood up And so I stopped, and all of the women are like, take my seat, take my seat, take my seat. And so I took a seat, and then the rest of the women sat down, except for the one whose seat I had taken, and she stood. And I was thinking, I didn't know what to think. I was confused. In that culture, the women stand, the men sit. That's just the way it is. So there's those little things that are going to throw you off, you know? So I think you just got to be ready for anything and relaxed, because nothing is going to happen quickly. It's all going to happen under a tremendous amount of heat, which is easy to get frustrated when you're hot. I certainly do. Yeah, I think if you can do those couple of things, it's probably going to be fine. Oh, and one more thing that's really big. Don't give anyone anything. One pula, a pencil, whatever. Because it's a cultural thing. They're not evil. You're never going to see it again. Everyone's trying to get ahead of everyone else, and that's one of the ways that they do simple little things like taking your pencil. It's weird. To me, it's weird.
It's a trophy, isn't it?
Yeah. And it all comes back to the Zulus and how they had to steal cattle before they were allowed to have a wife and whatever, it's a cultural thing that makes perfect sense to them and makes little sense to us.
What is your opinion on Africa? Do you see it ever evolving to the first world?
First, it's a big place. There's 54 countries. And if you want to have fun with the internet sometime, you can look at a map of how many countries fit into Africa. It's a big place. I only say that so that you take my answer with a grain of salt. I've been to less than a handful of these places. I can tell you that is some of the most rewarding time that I've spent has been in Africa. And some of the most frustrating time that I've spent has been in Africa. Wild places on the planet, it's Africa. There's nowhere else that is that wild. Even like Siberia, they have really good cell phone coverage. Africa still doesn't. And Siberia, very little of it has the bears left and stuff. So from the animal standpoint, it's the last place like that where you can see leopards or cheetahs or lions right next to zebras because they've just eaten and they don't care. And the zebras know they've just eaten, and so they don't care that they don't care. And you can do that from like 3 meters away. It's unbelievable. And it's also, incredibly frustrating. They are at times backwards. They have lots of dictatorship stuff happening. Their elections are essentially all rigged. They have
African-style democracy.
Well, and that's just it. Their democracy that's just us. We, the Western world came and said, this is what you guys should be doing. So they started doing it for the money. They did it for the aid. Like apartheid's a really good example. I remember when apartheid was falling, I was a student and I heard this stuff about this racism in these fence communities and how the blacks had to be outside of the fence by nightfall and whatever. And it certainly sounds terrible. But after you live there, you realize that, well, the reason they put these fences up is because we touched on it earlier. The whole stealing is good, I'm winning mentality. It's not good or bad, it's just their mentality. So the blacks would steal things and the whites are like, hey, we don't do that. And they're like, we do that. So the whites are like, okay, here's a fence. You guys can't come over here anymore. And then the blacks got pretty upset about that and said, you guys have these good jobs. We don't have any of that. So the whites said, okay, you can come over here, work, we'll pay you. And at sundown, you got to be on the other side of the fence or you get shot. Super harsh.
Was it shot?
Yeah, or beat, whatever.
It was just...
That stuff all sounds terrible. Under apartheid, everybody knew how to read. And there was virtually zero unemployment, like 94% employed. The big companies were required to give their workers homes and their workers' children education. And it was terrible. We thought it was terrible. America, the United States, was part of that drive to end apartheid. We put these sanctions on South Africa, whatever. And as a kid, I was like, yeah, this sucks. We should stop this. And the Afrikaans and the English were a community, two sets of different communities. They don't like each other either. But they were the financial control. They were the ones that had the factories and the farms that could produce more than just enough for the people that owned the farm. They had job opportunities.
And it's one of just a few countries that can sustain itself with all the minerals and, geography, bread baskets.
Well, that's the thing about Africa. If you look at the continent as a whole, they have every single resource that matters. They can grow food. They have the Nile River Delta. They have really fertile farmland, and they have oil and gold and diamonds and silver and the heavy metals, cadmium and laudanum and platinum and all the ones that are used for making computers and batteries and stuff. They got all that stuff. They're super duper wealthy. There are only 2 countries on that whole continent that know how to make a gun: South Africa and Libya. The rest of those countries buy their guns for killing other Africans from other places. Just think about that. They have all these resources that they ship away so they can get something back later, guns or cars or whatever. South Africa also makes some cars. I don't know if Libya does. But why not take their resources and make a car factory or a gun factory or a whatever factory?
I mean, this is the outsourcing age right now. You don't actually have to own and operate a business to get the service you need. You're just renting it, right? I mean,
well, if you spend some time in Africa, you can see that there's a lot of people not getting everything they need. And so, will they become first world? I don't see it happening in our lifetime. I really don't. And a big part of the reason is because of the Western world. We go in there with money and say, here you go. If you do this, we'll make life better. And do this is vote. So they put up these elections. They get high fives for voting. And then the NGO leaves and they go back to their tribal ways and no advancement. And that's not all bad. I mean, we, the Western world, Europe, Japan, the United States, we are a tax on this planet with the way we want to live.
If everyone did per capita,
be a bigger problem. It's already a problem.
I heard some encouraging news that millennials, they're not materialistic. Experience over material.
Good for them.
And that trend's happening now.
They should go to Africa. There is experience there.
The true currency experience.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Empirical. Isn't that the view that you have to just witness it yourself?
Yep. Empirical data. If you didn't gather it, it doesn't count.
You got to see it through with your eyes, right? You have to experience it. Otherwise, did it happen? That was Shane Patrick talking about flying helicopters in Africa. If you want to learn more about Shane or listen to more 10-Minute Travels, please check us out at 10minutretravels.com.
And we want to remind you to make sure that your sense of humor matches your sense of adventure.
Well, Shane, definitely a pleasure talking to you tonight.
Right back at you. Should we do some sort of sign off?
This message was brought to you by mushrooms and garlic and ginger.
Oh, And the letter M and the number 7. The guy who did Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch for the last 50 whatever years retired.
I heard that.
Here's to him.
I love you, Big Bird.
Good night, everybody. Good morning. You can listen to this anytime. That's the thing about podcasts.